In the next few minutes, what I'm going to try and do is summarize the 700-plus pages that are in the State of the News Media report, but hopefully advance it a little bit and tee up the conversation, which I'm really excited about, that's going to follow. Also talk a little bit about the changing news consumer, because I think that's obviously the key to what everybody on the panel is doing. So I'm going to start with sort of what's happening, but hopefully pivot into where things are going. First of all, there are a number of misconceptions about what's actually occurring in the news media culture, which is why the staff of PEJ, many of whom are here, dotted around, spend thousands of hours actually crunching through actual data to try and get a fix on what's occurring versus what people imagine is occurring. The first thing to recognize is that the problem in old media, for the most part, is more of a revenue problem than an audience problem. Look at these numbers: 26% down in revenue in 2009 for newspapers, 24% for local TV, 19% in ad revenue for magazines. Now look at the audience numbers. There are drops, but they're not nearly as severe. And in some of them, I mean, online revenue was down, but online audiences are up. So the notion that people are abandoning traditional media outlets and that audience fragmentation is at the heart of this is not really it. What it is, more simply, is that the audience is migrating online, as we'll see often to traditional outlets, but advertisers are not following them. We could spend a lot of time talking about why online advertising isn't working, but we'll gloss over that now. The scale of the losses in old media are enormous. We estimate in the report 1.6 billion lost in newspapers in annual capacity, annual budget, just in newsrooms. 300 million plus probably in network. Now there's an enormous amount of excitement in new media and new media experiments, in community media, in the efforts that are being funded by the Knight initiatives on community media. But in scale, they don't come anywhere close to what we're seeing in the market collapse on the revenue side in traditional media. Consider that 1.6 billion lost in the annual news budgets of newspapers. Over 4 years, all the nonprofit contributions outside of public media amount to 141 million, and that was just newspapers. Now, the other notion is that all of these revenue drops amount to a collapse in our media. They don't. They amount to a transition in our media at the moment. The media aren't shrinking. The commentary and discussion aspect of our media culture is becoming more robust. I think of this often as the sort of after-action element of our media culture. This is after people have consumed the news and find out what happens, they want to talk about it. Now, this is obviously a critical dimension of what media is supposed to do. I mean, the original news began in coffee houses and public houses. Public house is a fancy name for a bar, where people would come, and often these coffee houses were near shipping docks. People would come and talk about what was going on in the town, or they would talk to people who came off the ships and find out what was going on far away in Europe or elsewhere. In the United States or in the colonies, they would have a little log at the end of the bar, and people would get off stages, carriages, and write down things they'd seen in other towns. And you could go read the log, and it was a kind of early newspaper. And people would come and talk about it. So the idea that discussion is not an essential, fundamental part of journalism is wrong. It is. But as that discussion element of our media is growing, the repertorial dimension of our media is shrinking. In a sense, we have a narrowing of focus in some ways because you have fewer reporters congregated around fewer stories. In some cases, you actually have more reporters, a paradox in which you actually have more outlets covering news. Each of them is smaller, and they all cover the big story of the day. So we, in a sense, have more people congregated at the White House and fewer people at the Agriculture Department. We still have somebody at the big city metro mayor's office, but there are fewer reporters congregated at the zoning commissions of the suburban communities. At the same time, we have new news competitors coming in to fill the space, the void that they see created by the decline in traditional reportorial media. Just in the last year, we've seen a host of partisan groups. Watchdog.org is a group that's in a number of states that's funded by a libertarian anti-government group. It's very hard to find that out when you go to their websites. They're quite clear that they don't think they need to be clear about where the financing comes from. And they've hired trained journalists to do the work. But it's very hard to know what's behind that work. The Acorn story was an example of this kind of thing. Fiscal Times, a news organization that's staffed by traditional journalists, but is funded by the Pete Peterson people who are anti-deficit, and the Washington Post has had trouble with this. You're going to see more and more of this occurring in the next couple of years, because these are groups that have a political interest in covering the news and controlling the discussion about the news in the areas they're interested in. And making money at it isn't their goal. Shaping the discussion is. So those are not only going to grow, but their goal is to try and get the content that they create into the mainstream press that has a larger audience. And we're already seeing that. And the old media don't really know how to react to that. Frequently, the way this is going to work is they're going to hire journalists that the old media folks know and say, well, this is Al. You know Al. He's a trustworthy guy. It's Frank Sesno doing this work. Got nothing to worry about. Vivian. The other thing that we're seeing clearly is that the power is shifting to newsmakers. And one of the things that's making this happen is the tendency toward immediacy. Things are posted very quickly. Old media are making rapid use of new media technology. And while the new media technology offers the potential for infinite depth, it also offers the potential for instant speed. What we've seen in some of our studies is that the press release that's authored by the news-making agency, the government agency or whoever, is often adapted very briefly or very hastily and reposted by a news organization as a kind of quick story. And that moves, that's the first account and sort of establishes a baseline of what people understand about that event. That, along with the ability of news makers to sort of play off an expanding group of outlets against each other, speed and proliferation are ceding more power to those who would make the news.